it blew my mind. And this is where Mark and I actually got together to make the joint work that we're doing now. He's a literacy expert, and I'm the one that's designing Access in an architectural sense. The movie blew me away. It's free on YouTube, but it's also on Netflix, of course. And it talked a lot about this woman named Judy Heumann and her fight to create what in America became the Disabilities Act of 1990. And that did a lot of interesting things for people that had physical disabilities. And that same mindset is what I want to bring us into the other realm of what else is happening in our room. So we'll do that now, but again, I think you should totally watch that. It was amazing. So I have three main parts, and I'll kind of rifle through it, and I'm going to try to hit on just the right parts for us in our time here together. So I apologize if I zoom through it. But I do want to talk about the difference between differentiation and universal. I want to talk about something called curb cuts, universal design, and hostile design. And finally, we'll finish off with an idea of micro moments. It has this very adaptive schools vibe. Does anyone know adaptive schools? There's a vibe to that if you ever bump into it. Okay, so we have this curb here. And as we know, most curbs are not designed that way anymore, correct? I'm going to say differentiation in my classroom or on this curb is going to look like a unique, bespoke solution for every single case that I can imagine. So I can see where someone who's able-bodied can use this curb decently well, but I can also think of some very specific cases that might work as well. I might need a special ramp for a wheelchair. Maybe it's the right width and height and angle. Maybe I'm going to need another one for a pedestrian who is struggling to move up and down that curb. And still then, I might need a dolly. That's, in America anyways, that's what we call those carts that all of the delivery guys are using for packages for Amazon. The two-wheeled thing. What's that? What would that not be called? Or what is that called in the UK? Trolley. Trolley and dolly. Oh, there you go. So we could design curbs like this, but as I think you guys probably know, that seems a bit difficult to do to every curb. Would you guys agree? Yet, as a classroom teacher, and I am a classroom teacher, there's a substitute in my room right now, preparing them for the next assessment. I would find when I'm told to do things in this manner, create unique, bespoke solutions for every case situation, I find it exhausting. And I don't like it, and it really bothers me. And I think sometimes there's a disorganized sense to how we put these things together. One person from one spot in my school is going to say, Jim, create a solution that does this, and another person in another part of the school, like maybe the curriculum head or the tech head, and these two things are different. And so now I have extra work on my plate. How many of you guys feel that push as external forces are trying to convince our classrooms to do certain things? Does anyone else feel that way sometimes? That's a hard audience. Okay. Goodness, people, that we're being pushed to do a lot. Wouldn't it be a slightly better situation if, in fact, we had a singular solution? This is good as my architectural skills still work. We could imagine a solution to the problem of navigating this curb universally instead of differentiated. And if we have universal solutions inside of our classrooms that can create access for everyone, you're going to start to find case situations where you solved a problem that you didn't already know exist. You had pre-solved that situation with a better singular design. And on top of that, it's more efficient. You get more out of what you created, and you did less work. Ultimately, I think that's the goal. And sometimes we feel really alone in that design. Sometimes we as classroom teachers feel that we've made something that's truly outstanding, but there's no audience for it or a language for it. Well, I want to tell you, when you made something that was really neat and accessible to everyone in your room, you created universal design. When you were asked or decided on your own to create a very special, bespoke solution for a small group of students or a single student, you were differentiating. But our goal should be more universality. So I'm going to kind of explain why I think that would be the case and give you guys some ideas about that. So I just kind of explained it. I'm going to kind of go past a lot of the words. Are we not going to read them terribly much anyways? Claire's got this, by the way, and hopefully she sends it out to you guys, and you can grab onto more of it if you want, including the link to the movie. What I do like about the slide is what differentiation and universality asks. Differentiation, what do I need to adapt for my students? Where universal is saying, how can I create units and lessons that are usable by all students without the need for adaptations? So we know what differentiation looks like. We've kind of discussed it a little bit. We have a sense as to what that work looks like. We know when we get a special request from a student or a parent or a counselor or whatever it might be for a colleague, we know what that work takes to do to make that thing. We're good at that. So I want to now bring it to a fuller picture, because I don't think that we're just talking about physical limitations. We have a lot of others, case situations where our design matters. So we have learners that have different needs, that neurodiversity. And we also have a lot of DEIJ to consider in our classrooms as well. How accessible are texts? What information is being reflected inside of this stuff? And so I'll give you one particular example. So I like that Cornelius Minor has a great book called You Got This. But he says when students are failing of a certain group inside of an institution, it's probably not the student's fault. We can identify that it's the system's fault. And that's not your fault. It's the system's fault. But it is our job to participate within that system. So I'll give you guys a quick example. My math book, I decided to take a survey of the difference between male and female contextual situations that existed inside of my math book that I'm teaching out of 7th grade math right now. Any guesses as to the breakdown? Would you say there was equality? Would you say it was more male or more female?
Male.
Yeah, definitely. It was about anywhere between 66% and 75%, depending on the book, oriented towards male names and situations. And a lot of farmer questions. Why do they still think that's a thing? I just don't know. My kids don't care about it at all. So I had to act on that, and I had to ask myself, how can I access this? And so I announced to my students after I did the thing, and I wanted to hear directly from my 7th grade students, what should I do about this? And so there was a disagreement between boys and girls, as you can imagine. And then I announced I was switching to 100% female-oriented situations, stories, anecdotes, test questions, so that I could compensate for the book that will still be there. And the resulting noise from the students was, as you could imagine, pretty positive from the girls, a little wary from the boys. Then I made the change, and I said, well, I'll do it at some point. And I made the change, and no one seemed to notice. It just happened. So what I didn't understand was that I needed to go a little bit further than that. So I got a good set of pictures of female engineers, astronauts, scientists, set them up on my door and in my room, and I did a few more things. I found some texts that were very specific to the young women in my class, and then you could start to feel the change. And as I surveyed my students on their way out of that particular year, there was some very interesting and positive notes from both boys and girls about things that they had not noticed or realized. And just a very generic question, what did you not notice or realize or not wonder about before my class, but now you're curious about leaving my class? It's kind of like 3 main questions I ask my students every year. And both boys and girls noted the difference in that they were more interested in things that they hadn't been before. And I could see that reflection very clearly from both genders. And I was really appreciative of that change. And so I felt addressing the system, this book, that thousands of kids are learning out of from Pearson Publishing, and I was making a difference that was measurable. So I really appreciated that about the approach to the system that I was handed. So I was providing, I think in this example, I was providing all students opportunities to verbally rehearse ideas as partner pairs, because we were operating in female situations and names only. Like, I was constantly reflecting that. We were displaying sentence stems. In this case, this is from like a literacy lesson. All my questions were female-based. And finally, modeling how to use thinking in this subject. We were doing it again contextually. In this case, from a book from a UK author called I can't remember her first name, but her last name is Collado Perez, and it's called Invisible Women, and it's about data bias. And so I put that in my one of my units in 7th grade math, and we studied this book. And so we had this idea to model our thinking through our school situation and through this text. which was kind of a unique thing to be able to do. So what is universal design? I want to get through the very architectural ideas for a minute. So I want you to leave with these three terms. I want you to be able to identify when something is universal in your world or not. I want you to think about, I'll just go through them real quick. So what is universal design? This term, curb cuts, refers to the very thing we were talking about. It's shorthand in the tech world now. When your app is universally usable by you and anyone else that would possibly touch your phone, that's not accidental. The language it's used, the shapes of the icons, its colors, the pathways, the flows, everything's thought about in terms of multiple user cases. And when a designer in an app finds a situation that in fact is easier to use and better for more people, that's known informally as a curb cut. So I've started using that with my colleagues and the schools that I work with, and we talk about making curb cuts for students. So there's obviously not a curb cut here, but there is one here. So beyond the wheelchair, I want your feedback for a minute. Who else do you think would benefit from this haptic feedback, dots at the bottom, very large gentle slope, lighted strips? Who else is going to benefit from this besides the wheelchair? Can you guys raise your hand and help me? Yes?
Somebody visually impaired?
Vision impaired, definitely, because they'll be able to feel when they've arrived at that location.
Yeah, same.
Got it, yes.
I was going to say the same as well.
Oh, goodness.
Somebody older, pushchairs.
Older, pushchairs, yes, yes. What else? How about really young? Babies, or like, not babies, but, toddlers. Yeah, babies. Baby buggies. Who else can benefit from this?
Runners.
Excuse me?
Runners.
Runners, definitely. Yeah, they don't have to break stride or fall down. Who else?
Someone with an injury.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Runners and injury, that's going to be a category we're going to talk about in a second. Anyone else? My favorite came the first time I ever presented this, probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And a gentleman in the back row who hadn't said anything during my thing had his hand up in the air finally. And I called on him and he said, "Drunk guys in the middle of the night." I whipped my head around and looked at that. It's like, yeah, it's well lit. You can feel it when you're down there, and it's so gentle and calming with this big red road to get you to the other side of the street. That's the street corner I needed when I was 22. So that gets at the idea that there's more to it than, I want to zoom to it real quick, because your feedback was really good. That gets at an idea that we can deal with in our classroom. Our designs can be in 3 categories, potentially. Those curb cuts that we think of. We can think of the things that are permanent. We are asked, and it is expected of us, to deal with permanent situations all the time. Our dyslexic, dyscalculus students, our students with attention deficit disorder, we're used to accommodating for those. And I am dyslexic, and I grew up in a school system that was not able to deal with that situation whatsoever. I didn't finish my first book from beginning to end until I was 19 in university. I had to force myself to read. I can now, it's pretty good. I enjoy reading a ton. My wife gets annoyed with how much I like to read at this point. But it was a really hard trial by fire moment. Like, am I going to make it through university or not? Because I really can't spell. I misspelled George's incorrectly, and that's why it took so long for the thing to come up. I mixed the O and the E. I still struggle with vowel groups. I can read them okay, but my fingers, my thumbs specifically, I have no idea what to do with it. So this is a permanent situation that I'm dealing with, and I will live with it for the rest of my life. Temporary might have been something that I would have dealt with for only a certain stage of my life. My temporary one was anxiety. I was told to read from a Bible at a Catholic church when I was like 10, but I couldn't read, as you guys know. And I wasn't supposed to read. Like, the priest picked the wrong kid and just kind of like looked at me like, "I think you're reading this thing." Pulled me up. My friend Matt, I think, was supposed to read. He didn't. He just stood there. He was froze. And I was forced up to the altar thing, and I stumbled through it, and it was a complete mess. So as you can imagine, being in front of a group of people was something I had to get over. So that would be my temporary one. I worked my way through it and got to a better place. And situational is that momentary thing that happens where I need some support, but it wouldn't have been identifiable, an hour ago or 2 days ago. It's just a right now thing. And so sometimes when our curb cuts can match that design, where we had that situational drunk fella, the injured person coming down the street, and someone who is permanently physically impaired, we can see why that design works so well. And you can start to ask yourself that question. What about your classroom is able to do that incredibly well? And one of the things that strikes me the absolute most, and you may or may not be on this journey with me, but I've completely changed from the beginning of my career to believing that a math classroom was a place where students came prepared and did as they were told. And I've changed it more into a workshop. There's pencils everywhere, erasers. I keep erasers in my pocket. I meant to bring some today just to kind of demonstrate. I've got those pencil toppers. Any kid who's not erasing anything, whether they have an eraser or not, I'm going to throw one at them. And then they're full of color, so other kids want them, so I just keep throwing a few more at them. So the cheapest, easiest thing I can do is make sure that they have their materials. I have loads of calculators, loads of everything around, and buckets on my table. I am there primarily to teach them math. I do want them to learn preparation and being prepared and that sort of a thing. But if my main job is to do the math thing, I want to make sure any kid, for any reason, who had forgotten their calculator, that they have one. If I don't do that, I'm creating an inhibitor to their learning, I believe, at this point. And this is an evolution I've been on to get to that point. And you may or may not be there with me. But I've seen a change. It's not just the kids who always can't bring their materials to class anyways that are benefiting from it. I've created a safe and secure space where even those kids who are relatively responsible might have freaked out the 1 or 2 times that they didn't bring it and didn't want to see what my reaction to them was going to be. I didn't create space, as I think you know at the very beginning, I did not create space between myself and them over a calculator or a pencil or a ruler or an eraser. My room is becoming more inclusive of everyone's situations, whether permanent, not able to organize and keep their materials together, or situational, they just forgot it. So I'm trying to be this ramp in my classroom. I'm trying the lessons to be that way. I'm trying to make everything about my space accessible, easy, and friendly to make it about the learning, and then move from there, and then talk about those other related things about responsibility and stuff off to the side. So that's what I think of as universal design. And I like this one a lot. My Mexican Nana, her hand was kind of shaped like this near the end of her life, but she still wanted to cook for us. And she only had that carrot peeler on the right. Do you guys recognize that carrot peeler? From your childhood, probably? Does anyone still have one, own that one? I feel bad for you guys. That's hard to hold. I'm perfectly able-bodied, and if I had both of these in a drawer, which do you think I'm grabbing? Yeah. There are better things out in the world that we can use, and don't throw something away that's perfectly good, that works fine for you. But if you get the one on the left as a Christmas present, take it as a compliment. They're just universally saying we can all cook in this kitchen. Okay, that's the message there. So I love those examples of universal design that show us that we can, in fact, make something that's a little bit better without making multiple things. We don't need 5 carrot peelers for every member of the family. We just need one great one. That's what I want your classroom to be. Same thing with these grippers. This one down here is probably the most universal one, as you might be able to imagine. It was designed for an autistic child by a parent. And when I was a kid, not only was I dyslexic, I also gripped the heck out of my pencils so hard I made dents on my fingers. So I finally had a teacher show me a drawer of these things, and I got to pick one. And it took me a while to figure out one that I could use correctly. And I could start, it was like a triangular one, and I could start to hold it a lot better. And I was able to write more clearly, pretty much overnight. But the foam one probably would have been just as fine if there was just 3 or 4 of those in the room. I could grab one of those. Why have a bunch of very specific designs when you can have one that works a little bit better? So from carrot peeler to almost foam bicycle gripper thing that is now for your pencil. Does that look like something on a bicycle or a scooter? Yeah. I kind of want to get a few of these. I never did, but I found it for sale for autistic students. And read some stories of people using it for alternate purposes. This is another great example for me. Primary teachers might be able to understand this one to some degree. This is obviously a wheelchair accessible playground. That's its purpose, right guys? I had a little bit of anxiety when I was a kid, but my daughter is crushed with it. She's 9 years old, and she wouldn't greet a single one of you guys, even after knowing you for 10 minutes. It's going to take her a lot longer to even bother to say something to you. She is just stricken with anxiety, social anxiety, constantly. And when she was 3 and 4, and we take her to playgrounds, as soon as other kids would show up, I'd regularly take her to one early on a Saturday morning near where we lived. And she would bail off of the thing as soon as there were plenty of kids around. And I asked the teachers at her kindergarten if that was the same situation there, and they said, yeah, she only plays around the perimeter. She never goes on the thing. So then we went to America. We went on a playground like this. We were the first ones there that morning, and more kids started showing up, and she stayed on. And I think she was 4, something like this. So I tried to get, and if you've spoken to a 4-year-old recently, you know, like, it's hard to get a clear answer out of them. But I asked her, I tried to get the story out of her, and I think it goes something like this. She wasn't afraid to be trapped on the playground. She was afraid to always be trapped on the playground by bigger kids. And now this was wide enough for her to not feel trapped, and she had stayed on and played with other kids. So this design had nothing to do with her whatsoever. The architects who made this, or engineers who made this playground, had not intended to make this for her. And yet it was the first playground she played on with other kids she did not know. Sometimes your universal design stretches far beyond what you can imagine. If you go down that journey and ask yourself, who else can you solve your design for so that everyone can have this as an accommodation in your room? It's not accommodating, it's now the design of your room. You will never even know all the stories of the kids that will have benefited from that universality of design. The designers of this will never know that my daughter's life was different or better on that day, on their playground. But it was. So we talked about this a little bit. Best laid plans. You can try all you want, but sometimes it doesn't work out. And you know, I make mistakes too, and I think as long as I view my classroom as an experimental playground, as long as I'm constantly changing and adapting and thinking new ways that I want to do it for myself and for my students, not to please any admin, not to deal with any exterior forces at all. If I feel that I can keep messing with the design in my room, I feel alive in my career, and my students continue to benefit. And I really love the frame of asking myself, who else can I include in the singular design of my learning space, whether it's my assessments, or my lessons, or the physical space of my room. I'm constantly asking myself this stuff, and I'll make a mistake every once in a while. I tell my kids that I experiment with them, and they'll 7th graders, they'll get right up in your face, and they'll say, you know, when you started doing this thing with the stuff that you're doing right now, that's pretty terrible. I'm like, great, no, that's interesting for me to hear. And I keep moving with it, and I keep developing. And I may not always have the answer, and they know that, but I'm always trying. So I hope that you guys are also the experimenters that I enjoy being. If you feel that way in your heart of hearts every time you enter that classroom, you're in a great space. I just want you to know what you're doing is universal design, and that you're designing for best use case situations. I also want you to know when there's hostile design in a school. So what are those spikes for? What do you guys think that they're there for? Yeah.
To prevent homeless people sleeping under the bridge.
Rough sleeping, right? Yeah. Okay, rough sleeping. What else might this be about?
Keeping pedestrians from crossing?
Yeah, potentially pedestrians, yeah. I might be able to cross that as a pedestrian though, but it could be there for that, yeah.
To prevent mass congregation.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought about that one. Definitely, yeah.
Stop cars driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, no U-turns. I know you want to turn around here, but you cannot. And maybe like vendors selling stuff under there, right? Whether, food or water, something like that, being sold. So there's a lot of potential cases for this that those spikes exist for in this case. This one's obviously for, shout it out, everybody. Yeah, sitting and rough sleeping probably. This I think was a bank in Zagreb. I think I took that picture. So I like to think of both of those spikes as spikes, and I've got a lot of other photos and stuff in my talk when I'm just doing hostile design. And I'm talking all about those spikes. Actually, before I talk about this one, I'll just leave it here for a second. So I've adapted a term that I like to call spiking students. And the way in which we were spiking the students the most at my school, the American International School of Vienna, the middle school, the way we were spiking students the most for the longest time while I was there is if a student forgot their little lunch card, an ID card. They check out books at the library with it, or they get lunch, right? If a student forgets it, they were asked at the lunch line to go back to the office, get a physical stamp placed on their hand, return to the cafeteria, stand in a separate line, wait for all the kids to go through, and then they could go through. We were literally stamping kids with ink for the remainder of the day to say that they did not bring their lunch card to school. That is a spike if I've ever heard one in my life. We are trying to prevent them from doing something. We didn't fix the problem. A spike is not fixing homelessness. This doesn't fix homelessness, guys. It pushes it somewhere else. We were literally pushing students somewhere else because they couldn't remember a little plastic card. How many 7th graders do you think struggle remembering a little plastic card? Most, yeah. Guys, my boss is Cam, right? The woman you just heard? I visited her for the first time in London, and I left in Vienna, and I missed my flight. Because guess what, guys? I got a new backpack, but I have a laptop in here and an iPad. And, you pull them out of your bags when you go through the security thing. I was really nervous to meet her. It was an early morning flight. I was pretty freaked out. We'd been working online together for a long time. That's my excuse, but I'm just forgetful. I forgot them both at the security area, and I boarded my plane without them. And I wanted to watch a movie, so I opened my bag to see where they were, and they were not there. Hopped off the plane before they closed the door, rebooked my flight, and sat for 8 hours in the Viennese airport. I was too embarrassed to call my wife. Come pick me up, let's have lunch together. No, I just sat there, did work on my laptop. I'm incredibly forgetful. I'm glad I'm even here today. I'm at the right school. I was sitting there this morning out at the thing like, man, is this the right day? Am I even supposed to be here? I can get that lost. And my poor 7th graders, who maybe will be able to deal with laptops better than me when they're adults, they can't remember their card. And we felt the nerve for years to spike them and stamp them. How many of you guys have seen colleagues that roll into a meeting without the right materials? Life goes on. I rebooked my ticket. I lost 125 euros, I think. They charged me twice. I don't know why. Once for 100 and once for 25. I don't know. I paid the price. Forgot it. Okay? And I had to wait longer, but that was on me. It wasn't by design, No one said, "Oh, you forgot your stuff. Well, here's your punishment." Although I found out later at the Viennese airport, if you lost something, you have to pay to get back from the lost and found. Isn't that a bit of a spike? It didn't prevent me from losing anything. I assume that fee is there, just as this is, to prevent something that they don't want from happening. And yet, you can probably identify things in schools you've worked in before, or even this school, a thing that is well-meaning, but is a spike to students. So I want you to carefully think about that and use that term, spiking students, as you come across something that fits that bill. And you guys can then dialogue about that and then ask yourselves, what is a better solution for the situation that we have before us? Since we don't want to spike students, but we also don't want that behavior or that situation to occur. And then you can move forward from that. So we can talk about texts that spike students this past spring. You saw a lot of Dr. Seuss books get canceled, so to speak, to use the parlance of our times. There were Asians that were depicted in a terrible way in a few of these books. And some people didn't want them in schools anymore because it was going to spike students in their impressions on how they see themselves in that book, whether they be of Asian descent or not. So we can all love Dr. Seuss, but we can also work to not spike students. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. So we can ask ourselves with those materials that we're using, what is the ultimate message that's being sent to whom and why? This is precisely why I felt that the girls in my math classroom were getting spiked, by seeing maths as a male topic. And that it was my job to unspike the situation and bring it back to more parity between genders. And I needed to do that. Now that I saw the spike, I needed to change it. I needed to bring the universality back to my classroom. So I'm not into cancel culture necessarily, but I just want you to have that idea that there's an in-between there somewhere. So I'm going to skip this. So I want to talk about micro moments, and then I'll take just a few questions with the leftover time that I have. And I think you guys You're so quiet that I'm worried I'm not doing a good job. So when you chuckled a little bit, I appreciated it. Thank you. So, micro moments. So besides the physical space of your classroom, besides the textbooks, besides whether or not you have calculators available for them, or whether or not you're placing stamps onto their hands for something dumb they did, I want you to think about also how we talk with students, and maybe this will open up pathways for you to communicate with other colleagues of yours. Because I know some of you guys are going to definitely have identifiable reasons in your room why you've done a great job in this next series that I've shown you, and maybe areas where you can work on it a little bit. I still have them myself for sure. So I'm going to just show you three, and then we can kind of chat a little bit. Finding pathways, removing roadblocks is our first example of a micro moment in discussion, in dialogue with students. The gray is going to be the student, blue is the teacher. I didn't do my homework, and I'm going to email your parents. I would call it a bit of a spike to some degree. The relationship between having done homework is something that is a parent issue versus, okay, can you do it tonight? Do you need help? How about at lunch? So you can stretch out your arms and say, is it a time issue? Let me help you resolve that, even though you're now not prepared for my class. Do you need help? Maybe there's a learning situation. You are in frustrational mode at home. Can I help you resolve that? And when can we do that? That is opening up your arms to the learner rather than pushing them away with the, I'm going to email your parents idea. Number 2, I'm going to fail the test. Take it and let's see. This is me. I made this because that is exactly what's happened to me. Are there any math teachers in the room? Thank you. Has a student ever walked into your room and said, I'm going to fail this test? It's the worst feeling in the world, isn't it? And what I've always done is said, you can fix it afterwards, but I really want you to do it now. And very recently, and kids do abuse this, I just want you to know you don't have to be like me. I'm still working on this one. This is a very contemporary one. I'm now saying, truly, would you be willing to take it after getting some help from me? When would you be available? I am now telling my students, if you're not ready to take the test, don't take it. I'm going to not enjoy grading your F, and you're not going to enjoy taking it. So why don't we work together to find a time when we can do this at another time? But 7th graders, do you think that they might try to abuse that rule a little bit? Yeah. So I'm sorting through how I'm doing this exactly, but I'm getting there. I don't want to spike students who truly feel like they're just going to walk into an assessment and fail it. We don't need them to complete it for an hour and for me to grade it for 20 minutes for us to know that. Can we arrive at that conclusion early enough to get to the part where they're going to retake the test anyways, more directly? And finally, number 3, my team won the game. This might be how you'd see it written in a primary school, let's say, or an English learner. I could say, let's deal with the spelling, right? Or maybe the point of them writing that sentence at that moment really wasn't about them trying to get the grammar piece correctly. I think maybe they wanted to tell me that their team won a game. And I need to start there and then move towards the topical parts of the lesson that we want to do and say, hey, that's pretty great. Tell me about it. Did you score a goal? Where was it? What team was this about? Okay, that's neat. Now let's talk about the sentence. Kind of honor the energy that they're providing me inside of that classroom. So I've talked a little bit about micro moments with you guys today, just to review. Hostile design or spiking students. Developing curb cuts that bring you to a universal learning experience. And ebbs away from, did I use that word right? Ebbs? Ebbs away from differentiation as is possible. I find that the more that I'm able to do this, the more cultural context I'm bringing in, the more gender issues that I'm inclusive about how I speak with my students, the more issues related to persons of color on my school campus, whether they be colleagues or students. I'm finding my world is broadening further and further and further, the more universal I attempt to be. But it's a journey, it's a process, it's a lot of work, and having these terms has allowed me to talk with my colleagues about it and enter into meaningful dialogue with them. Whether it's is this universal? Like, who are we leaving out here? Or we're definitely spiking kids with that stamp on their hands. Or finally, asking ourselves, let's drill down to how did you talk with your student about this? Like, what did we say? What was the message that they heard? What did you mean by it? And what are we going to do a little bit different in a micro-moment setting? Guys, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I'll take any questions with any leftover time. So thank you very, very much. I think it's like 25. Oh goodness, I don't usually actually leave time for questions. That's like a thing you say you're gonna do, but I have a little bit of time here. I can either go into depth or take some questions, or even do a couple turn-in talks. Do you guys have any immediate questions for me? I almost never do with presenters. I'm almost too embarrassed to raise my hand. Okay, let's do a quick turn-in talk. Then I want you to turn to your neighbor. I want you to say, what is the one thing that you do want to take away from this? And then, because you got to be nice to me first. And then, what is the one thing that you're not ready to embrace? You don't really like it very much. Turn and talk. You get 1 minute, and then I'll call in for you guys.
I don't know. I'm trying to think, like, obviously, instead of designing it for the person,
I actually try to do this and find the words better for both sides. If I adapt I find that actually all different. So it's something that I really try to see my the spice thing is a bit difficult. I get to micro
All right, let's regather. If you guys don't mind. Okay, so that was relatively open-ended. I want to see if there's any bravery out there, someone that specifically wants to raise their hand and say something that they're not jamming on just yet. I'd love to hear that part. That's always the most, look, I teach middle school. I'm used to taking as much heat as you can imagine, guys. Those 13-year-olds throw it at me. So you think you're any good? No, don't worry about it. So I love that challenge, and I want to hear it all the way through. Or if you have something that you want to reflect that you're thinking about for your own work, that's also a nice thing too, guys. So are there any volunteers that feel maybe more ready to share now? Go ahead.
Something positive, because I really struggled to find anything that I didn't want to adapt. But at the moment, I've got a child in my class that needs a now and then sort of like instructions. I'm thinking how I could adapt that so it could be something that I could use for the whole class. So maybe breaking down the simple instructions. So now you write the date, then you do this, or maybe like simpler instructions that everybody could use as well, instead of just having it for one person.
Yeah, I like that. So that like multiple steps are a struggle for the student?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe, but I think it would benefit everyone. The simpler it is, the more easy it is to follow for most of the class as well.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you. Completely unrelated. My brightest math student that I had was a kid named Ji Woo. But he had some sort of orientation limitation. I'm still not sure what it is. And after a while, I think he was maybe playing it up a little bit. But he couldn't find his way around our school, which is a literal maze. If you've ever been to the American International School of Vienna, it's a literal maze. So for the first, I think, 6 or 8 weeks, we just had a kid link him in the arm and take him to his next class. Brightest math student I have couldn't figure out where to go. He didn't even use his locker for that first half of the year. It was just in his backpack. So it's sort of like that. And so there's a benefit that this kid has in your classroom. He's probably great at something, but is going to need that support. And so can that support be for everyone? And then also maybe a question in your mind might be like, how else do we bring the values of this kid out too as well at the same time? So thank you very much. Other thoughts, feedback? Yes?
We were talking, we really like the idea of like universality, I can't really say it. But I think, when I plan lessons, or when I used to plan lessons, I really found that actually considering differentiation just made my planning better anyway, because if you're like, oh, they're bright, we can just whiz through this, do this, you don't really think about every single step of the lesson. So I think they're really like intertwined. And sometimes I make resources just for the special needs students in a class, and quite often they get used by everyone as well. So
Yeah.
I think if you start by considering differentiation, quite often it just widens out anyway into creating something that's really useful for everyone, or creating a lesson that everyone can access as well.
Perfect.
Really, really important.
Yeah. I have a that is exactly what I had to do with a situation with a kid who had a visual impairment. I had to make the paper blue. I was told by the learning specialist it had to be blue. Kids kind of liked it. It was like this baby blue, and I don't remember the name of it. But then the teacher said, take everything that's A4, turn it to A3.
Yeah.
I stopped using blue paper because the school didn't want to buy it for me anymore. But every single assessment I have now that was sized on the A4 is now sized on the A3. And there's a bit of map shock, but they don't have to turn it over anymore. I can fit it all onto one side. And so my entire math assessment is on the front face of one A3. And the kids love it so much more. It's for one kid one day, years ago, and it's never changed in my room since then. And the kids talk about being able to see the entire assessment and follow their thinking through the entire page, rather than flipping through the page where there's only 2 or 3 elements on an A4. And so now there's 10 elements on one A3. And the kids say, I can see my thinking better. And then when they go do you guys do map testing here? My students in the spring. Sorry. No.
Is that universal?
Yeah. That technology was made for the visually impaired, right? But helped us today laugh a little bit. Map test shows a single question on a single page, and then it's gone. And so that kid's thinking has stopped as soon as they clicked forward on it. But on my math assessment, they can go back and forwards across every single element the entire time they're looking at it. And so now their thinking is a literal visual map, and then map testing doesn't do that. It's really just like momentary testing, I call it. It's just whatever they can get out of that single moment. That's one adaptation I made for one kid, one day, 1 year, and it's stuck forever. Other thoughts out there about what we had to say? Anyone want to challenge me on anything? Yeah.
No, I don't want to challenge you now.
Oh, come on. Come on.
We were just talking about like spiking students. What's so interesting is we expect the kids to be in by like 8:30, and we work specifically in the early years, and they're not really responsible for the time that they come to school, really. And then I have this kid who always arrives about 15 minutes late every sit down, come on, get on with it. And it's not his fault that he's late, but I straight away rush him into doing this activity he's not ready for really, and he's not really responsible. He knows he's late, but he knows he's not really responsible for it. But because I'm rushing him, it sort of immediately will spike him.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think I need to be reflective about my process about that too. I've got a girl named Yara who's always late to our COVID testing right now. What do? I rush her into it. I make her feel that, and it's not her fault. Thank you. You actually kind of helped me think a little bit right now too. Others? Yes?
Just again on the concept of spiking, I think that, I guess it's more of a question really. What you've said is that it's well-meaning, which is a term that stuck with me often. The processes are well-meaning, and those processes exist because we're trying to encourage a certain behaviour, or trying to encourage organisation, or whatever it may be. So if spiking isn't the answer, which obviously isn't, and I do agree, can you give me an example of an alternative to say, okay, don't do this, but do this? So the lunch thing, for example, how do you get around that? This kid doesn't have the lunch token. What do you do instead? What should be done?
Yeah. I struggle with this one a little bit too, and that's why I think I told you my laptop story that I did not tell Cam, who I don't know where she is in this building. If she ever finds out, I'm going to be embarrassed. But I think in one sense we can always remember that our kids are going to be imperfect as much as we are as adults, and that we can allow them to be mistake makers. So I think we can take some pressure off of ourselves to some degree to try to peel back what we're really there for and what's really important, and what we can let them live with, their imperfections to some degree. But then also, let's take the organization one. We still believe in it as a school, but I'm not making kids show up with almost anything to my math classroom. If I'm having paper and pencils and calculators, they could just walk in with almost nothing and take my class. That didn't teach them how to be responsible. It taught them that I was going to do it for them, correct? So we have tried to differentiate in 3 levels, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, a specific thing that we wanted them to achieve well. So we could have a singular group focus on that thing. So the physical planner of writing in their homework and all those details is a 6th grade goal. The 7th grade goal is management of lockers and space. And an 8th grade goal is a management of time at home. So we strategically placed our efforts into a cohesive plan where we could all do that together. And so I open my cupboards anytime that we're going to do our lockers, and it's usually fine. I'm not a messy person really. But I invite them to reorganize mine for 5 minutes, and the kids like rush into anything that I have and fix it. Spell pencils wrong or something, and like slap it, make a drawer out of it, and then they're there now instead of where they were before. And then they run off and they do theirs, and then I inspect their locker. So I think just being more strategic and careful about it. Our students have 10 classes that they go to, which I find irresponsible at this point, like knowing a 7th grade brain, 5 each day. And I know thinking about that it's at that age, it's a real struggle to get through the day and have 10 different teachers' regulations and specifications. And so I feel better when we're organizing together a group goal and saying we're all going to do this together, instead of I've decided right now for this next hour that this is the thing that you had to have right. So sometimes it's better work with colleagues, I think, and then dialing it back to a few important things. In that specific instance, is that the right solution for every school? No, but I invite you to go develop one for your own school. That if you find spikes, what else could you do differently? Did that help a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of the example I was thinking of was 17, 18-year-olds who in 6 months will be going to live by themselves. And so with the example of organisation, it becomes more important to actually say, well, no, the reality is that if you don't learn to do these things, as much as we may want to help you, you're going to find yourself stuck when you leave home. And so to try and encourage independence at the upper end of school, which is different from your experience.
Yeah, I can't speak to that directly, but I think that is a really interesting thing to go with. And really dialogue with your colleagues about it. To what extent do you want to intervene in that, and to what extent do you want them to just deal with their own consequences and allow them, like, kind of pull away and to some degree and let them figure it out now before it matters when they're in university, Just checking the time, guys. I think that's really about it. I thank you guys terribly, and I'm around a little bit today, so if you want to chat with me, please do. So thank you for your time today and inviting me here.
Thank you.
Schedule if anyone needs it on their way out to help them find where to go next or what to do. I'll walk you there. Is this yours? Are you doing okay?